Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today is Tuesday, February 3rd, 2026. And, I want to start today by just asking you, the listener, to do something for a second. Just check in with your own brain.
That feels like a dangerous thing to ask somebody these days.
It really does. But I'm serious, just for a moment. Think about the last time you opened your newsfeed, or, God forbid, you scrolled through X.
Really, Twitter, yes.
Or even just watched a standard government press conference. There's this feeling we all have. I'm sure you feel it too. It's not just confusion.
No, it's heavier than that.
It is. Confusion sort of implies that there's an answer out there and you haven't found it yet. This is something different. It feels almost visceral.
Yeah, it's a sense that the floor is unstable, like the ground itself is shifting under your feet.
That's the perfect way to put it. The ground is moving.
Huh.
And the late philosopher Daniel Dennett, who I believe passed away just a few years ago, he had this incredibly evocative phrase for it.
Right, I know the one you're thinking of.
He called it epistemological murk.
Murk. It's the perfect word. It's not clear water, it's cloudy, it's dirty, you can't see the bottom, you don't know how deep it is.
Exactly. And Dennett's whole argument, which is kind of staggering when you really think about it, was that we are living through a period of uncertainty. I mean, a kind of uncertainty we haven't seen since the Middle Ages.
Which is just a wild claim on its face.
It's completely wild. I'm sitting here, I've got a smartphone in my pocket that has access to literally the sum total of all human knowledge updated in real time.
And that's the paradox, isn't it? We have more raw data, more facts, more information available to us in a single second than a medieval scholar would have encountered in his entire lifetime.
Right.
And yet somehow we seem to have less agreement on what reality is than, say, a peasant did in the year 1350.
That is the exact thing we need to unpack today. Because for most of us, for you listening, this murk probably shows up as a conflict.
A tension.
A war, almost.
Yeah, a war. On one shoulder, you've got this intense, almost frantic demand for data. Show me the study. Show me the peer review. Trust the science. The spreadsheet world. The technocratic impulse. The facts crowd.
Right. But then on the other shoulder, you have this other voice, and it's screaming just as loudly. And it's making this intense moral demand to honor lived experience.
Speak your truth. You can't deny my reality.
Exactly. And these two things, the spreadsheet on one side and the personal story on the other, they feel like they're at war.
They are in open warfare, and our usual response is to just throw a label on it. We call it the post-truth era, we shrug, and then we go back to doom scrolling.
But we are not going to do that today. We're going to do something different. We are not going to talk about the latest political scandal or parties or elections. We are going to do a bit of an archaeological dig.
I love that metaphor because the chaos of 2026, it didn't just fall out of the sky. It wasn't an accident. It has an architecture.
Architecture.
Yeah, there are foundations. What we're living through is the downstream result of a very specific intellectual split.
Yeah.
A bifurcation in the road of Western thought that happened, roughly 70 years ago.
So that's our mission today. We want to trace the roots of our modern confusion all the way back to that split. To really understand why facts don't seem to persuade anyone anymore, and at the same time why lived experience has become this kind of absolute, unimpeachable authority.
And to do that, we have to talk about something that I admit sounds incredibly dry. It sounds like a seminar you definitely slept through in college.
Yeah, it does.
The Analytic Continental Divide.
I can literally hear listeners' eyes rolling. The Analytic Continental Divide. It just sounds so dusty and academic.
It does, but please stick with us.
They have to.
Because I promise you, this dusty academic divide is the reason your Thanksgiving dinner arguments go absolutely nowhere. It's the reason our political discourse has collapsed into just screaming matches. This isn't just history. It's like, it's the hidden operating system running our current nightmare.
Okay, so let's grab our shovels. Let's start digging. We need to go back in time. Not all the way to the Middle Ages, but to the mid-20th century.
Blah.
Let's say the 1950s.
The 1950s, the Second World War is over, the world is trying to rebuild, and inside the philosophy departments of the West, a huge fracture in starting to form. And it's not just an intellectual disagreement, it's almost a geographical divorce.
Okay, set the scene for us. Who's on which side of this divorce?
Well, on one side you have the analytic camp, and geographically we're talking about the English-speaking world.
The UK, the US.
The United Kingdom, the United States, and then eventually the Nordic countries get pulled into that orbit too.
Okay, so the Anglosphere, basically.
Right, and then just across the English Channel, you have the Continental camp.
So France, Germany, Italy.
Exactly. France, Germany, Italy, the heart of mainland Europe.
And it wasn't just that they disagreed. I mean, philosophers always disagree. This was different, right? They basically stopped talking to each other.
It was worse than that. It was what some have called a wall of silence. For nearly 50 years, it was like they were operating in parallel universes. They didn't read each other's journals. They didn't hire each other's students.
They just pretended the other side didn't exist.
Or when they did acknowledge them, it was with total contempt. The analytics looked at the Continental stuff and called it poetry masquerading as logic. They genuinely thought it was intellectually dishonest.
And the other way around.
The Continentals looked at the analytic work and called it naive. They thought it was simplistic, reductionist, scientism. They felt it was cold and soulless. It completely ignored what it means to be human.
Okay, so let's break down the vibes here, because this really sets the stage for everything that follows. Let's start with the analytic camp. The UK and the US, what are they obsessing over in, say, 1955?
One word: clarity. Above all else. Clarity, precision, formal logic. You have to understand, they looked at the entire history of philosophy, all these big, dense, murky books by people like Hegel talking about spirit and the absolute, and they just wanted to burn it all down.
They saw it as a mess.
A total mess. They wanted to do a cleanup job. Their attitude was, if you can't say it clearly, you don't really know what you're talking about.
They wanted to be more like scientists.
They completely aligned themselves with the natural sciences. There's a metaphor that I've heard used for this that I think is just perfect. For the analytic tradition, philosophy is a scalpel.
The scalpel, okay.
Yes. The goal is to be precise, to cut reality down to its cleanest, most logical joints. It's conceptual housekeeping. The idea is to get rid of all the nonsense and just be left with clear, verifiable propositions.
This reminds me of, wasn't there this whole movement with figures like A.J. Ayer or W.V. Quine? I remember reading about something called the verification principle.
That is the absolute core of it. A.J. Ayer was this young, brilliant British firebrand. He wrote a book called Language, Truth, and Logic that just sent a shockwave through the philosophical world.
And what was the big idea?
He basically argued that a statement is only meaningful, literally has meaning, if it can be empirically verified.
Okay, so give us an example of what that means in practice. What does that rule out?
Well, it rules out almost everything we actually care about as human beings. No, seriously. If I say the boiling point of water at sea level is 100 degrees Celsius, Ayer would say, great, that's a meaningful statement. We can test that. We can verify it.
Right, this is a fact.
But what if I say stealing is wrong, or God is love, or even that Picasso painting is a work of genius?
What would Ayer say about those?
He would say they are literally nonsense.
Nonsense. Not just wrong, but nonsense.
He called them nonsense, as in they have no cognitive content. They don't actually state a fact about the universe. For Ayer, when you say stealing is wrong, you're not describing a property of stealing. You're just making an emotional noise. It's the equivalent of saying stealing yuck or stealing poo.
So all of ethics, all of aesthetics, all of theology, just gone, just emotional noise.
Like wiped off the map. For these guys, for the Scalpel guys, truth with a capital T is something you discover. It's hard, it's objective, it's out there in the world. And our job is to polish our language until it perfectly mirrors that hard external reality.
Okay, so truth is discovered. That's the mood in Oxford and Harvard. Now, let's swim across the channel. Let's go to Paris or Freiburg. What's happening in the Continental camp?
It's a completely different world, and you have to remember the context. This isn't a clean, victorious, post-war society. France, Germany, Italy, these places were the battlefield.
They had been occupied, Destroyed.
They had seen the Holocaust up close. They had seen their societies, their institutions, their ideas of progress completely collapse into barbarism.
Well, they're probably not in the mood for some clean, detached logic.
They are deeply suspicious of logic. They saw how highly efficient, highly logical, highly rational systems were used to organize the slaughter of millions of people. So their core values aren't clarity and science. Their core values are things like history, context, power dynamics, and human suffering.
So if the analytic metaphor is the scalpel, what's a metaphor for the continental tradition?
The metaphor is a lens.
A lens. Okay, so what does that imply? They're looking at how we see things.
Exactly. They aren't trying to cut through to the objective facts. They're trying to interpret how our view of the world is colored or distorted by our history, by our language, by our culture, by our traumas.
So they would say you can't just step outside of your own skin, outside of your historical moment to see the world as it really is.
That's the fundamental claim. You are always situated. You're always looking through a lens. So while the Americans are asking, is this sentence logically valid? The French are asking a totally different set of questions.
Like what?
They're asking, who is speaking right now? What power structures allow them to speak and silence others? What historical pain is being expressed or hidden behind this statement?
This sounds a lot more like figures we've heard of, like Martin Heidegger or later on Michel Foucault.
Yes, they are the key figures. And for them, the whole idea of objective truth with a capital T is a myth. It's a fantasy. Or worse, it's a tool of power.
A tool of power. How so?
They would argue that the people who get to define what objective truth is are the people with power. So, truth is never neutral. It's always trapped or situated within these historical contexts and power structures.
So this is not just a difference in style. This is a fundamental dispute over the very nature of reality itself.
Absolutely. The analytic side believes reality is a kind of puzzle that can be solved with the right logical tools.
Right, the scalpel.
And the continental side believes reality is more like a dense, complicated story that has to be interpreted.
With the lens.
And for decades, they absolutely hated each other for it.
The wall of silence.
It was a real wall. The analytics looked at the continental work, all this dense, poetic writing about being and nothingness and the other, and they just dismissed it. They said it was willfully obscure, poetry masquerading as logic.
And the other way.
The Continentals looked at the analytic work and called it scientism. They thought it was hopelessly naive. They argued that by stripping away all the messy human stuff, history, emotion, power, to get to the pure logic, the analytic philosophers were performing this cold, detached operation that completely missed the point of human existence.
So you have the scalpel calling the lens nonsense, and you have the lens calling the scalpel blind.
And, if this had just stayed in the faculty lounges of universities, maybe we wouldn't be in the mess we're in today. But ideas don't stay in their cages, they escape.
And that moves us right into the next phase of our history. This is section 2, the evolution. Because we're not in the 1950s anymore. We're moving into the 70s and the 80s.
Right. And this is where things get really interesting and maybe a little scary. Because the continental side, the lens side, it starts to evolve. It gets more aggressive. We see the rise of something called post-structuralism.
Yeah.
And we have to talk about one specific name here. He's kind of the boogeyman of modern philosophy for a lot of people.
Jacques Derrida.
Jacques Derrida.
I feel like his name gets thrown around all the time, usually as an insult, by people who don't really know what he was talking about. He's become the stand-in for bad postmodernism. But what was his actual core contribution here?
His core contribution was a technique or an idea called deconstruction. Now, this is a super complex topic, but for our purposes today, we just need to understand his argument about language.
Okay.
He argued that language is inherently unstable. It doesn't work like a clear window that transparently mirrors reality, which is what the analytic folks were hoping for.
Can you give us a concrete way to think about that, an example?
Sure. Think about looking up a word in a dictionary. Let's say you look up the word justice.
Okay.
What do you find? You find a definition, but the definition is just more words. It'll say fairness, law, righteousness.
Right.
So then what do? You have to look up the word fairness, and what do you find there? Even more words. You never actually hit reality. You never get to the bottom and find the thing itself. You are always just deferring to other meanings within the system of language.
So it's an infinite loop of words, just pointing at other words.
Exactly. Derrida's point was that because of this, meaning is always slippery. It's never fully present in any one word or sentence. It's always being postponed, deferred.
And if meaning is always slippery, then what does that mean for, say, a text, like the Constitution or the Bible or a great novel?
It means they don't have one single, solid, stable meaning. It means they can be taken apart, they can be deconstructed to show all the hidden assumptions and contradictions inside them.
I can just imagine the analytic philosophers, the guys who worship at the altar of clarity and logic, hearing this and just losing their minds.
Oh, they absolutely loathed it. There was a famous analytic philosopher named John Searle who was just openly, virulently hostile toward deconstruction. He basically called it intellectual trickery, a kind of philosophical con game.
What was his core objection?
He said it lacked rigor. The accusation was, if you remove the criteria for truth and falsity, if you say language never really touches reality and there's no stable meaning, then philosophy just ceases to exist. It becomes a game you can't win or lose. Anything goes.
Okay, but here's the crucial plot twist in our story, right? The analytic philosophers, they might have won the battle inside the philosophy departments.
They did, for the most part.
But they completely lost the war in the wider culture.
That's exactly right. And this is what we might call the lab leak of ideas.
The lab leak. Explain that metaphor. How did this virus get out?
Well, you have to look at what was happening in the universities. Analytic philosophy, with its focus on formal logic, philosophy of mind, advanced mathematics, it became more and more technical, more and more insulated.
Dry.
Very dry. I mean, if you walked into a top American philosophy department in 1985, they were doing work that looked a lot more like a math department than what you'd think of as philosophy. It was hard. It was not sexy.
Right. It wasn't exactly capturing the imagination of the undergrads.
Not at all. But continental theory, Foucault, Derrida, it migrated. It was like an invasive species. It just completely took over the rest of the humanities.
It moved into the literature departments, sociology,
Anthropology, history, cultural studies, gender studies, all of them.
Why? What was the appeal?
Because it gave them a powerful new toolkit. If you're a literature professor, Derrida is incredibly exciting. He gives you this new, rebellious way to read texts. You aren't just passively appreciating the book anymore, you are actively dismantling it, showing how it's a product of power.
So while the philosophy grad students were doing logic puzzles, the English majors were all reading Foucault and Derrida.
Exactly. And over a generation, the entire focus of the humanities began to shift. The analysis moved from talking about events to talking about discourse. It moved from seeking truth to exposing power.
And everything started to be analyzed through these new lenses.
Yes. Patriarchy, colonialism, capitalism, these became the fundamental structures through which all language, all history, all art was analyzed. They weren't asking, is this book true? They were asking, what systems of power does this book reinforce?
So you end up with a whole generation of students, particularly in the humanities, being trained to see the world exclusively through the continental lens, to see power, context, and the instability of language everywhere.
And crucially, they were being taught that the very idea of objective truth is often just a mask for power. That when someone in authority says, I'm just stating the facts, what they are really doing, consciously or not, is enforcing a specific dominant worldview.
So in the culture, the lens starts to eat the scalpel.
It absolutely devours it. And that brings us to today. The seeds that were planted in those literature seminars in the 1980s have now fully blossomed into the tangled, thorny jungle of the 2020s.
Let's move into that jungle then. Section 3, the post-truth era. We're looking at the world from, say, 2016 to today, 2026. Because now, these two camps, these two ways of seeing the world, they're not just ignoring each other in university hallways anymore.
No, they are colliding violently in the streets, on social media, in Congress, in our families.
And what's so fascinating and sort of tragic is the great irony of this moment.
Which is what?
It's that The analytic philosophers and their descendants, the scientists, the data analysts, the economists, they now find themselves desperately trying to defend the idea of objective facts
Right.
against a culture that has completely and totally assimilated the core tenets of continental skepticism.
It's the trust the science crowd versus the my truth crowd. But I think we need to be really careful with that term post-truth. It gets misused constantly.
How so? What's the common mistake?
Well, people hear post-truth and they think it means we're in an era with an absence of facts, or that people are just lying more than they used to. But that's not really it. We are drowning in facts.
Right. I can find a study to prove literally anything I want in about 5 seconds on Google.
Exactly. So post-truth isn't about a lack of facts. It more accurately defines the collapse of shared epistemological authority.
Okay, break that down. Shared epistemological authority.
It means we can all agree that facts exist in theory, but we cannot agree on the process or the institution that gets to validate a fact. We can't agree on what counts as a fact anymore.
It's a crisis of the referee. We don't agree on who gets to make the call.
That's a perfect way to put it. And just look at the standoff that results from this. On one side, you have the analytic inheritance in our public life. This is every time you hear someone appeal to data, to statistics, to scientific consensus.
Look at the chart. Read the peer-reviewed study.
And that seems so reasonable, right? I mean, of course we want policy to be based on data.
Sure.
But here's the hidden flaw in that approach. The analytic tradition defends facts procedurally. It says, this is true because it went through the scientific method, it was peer-reviewed, it was published in a journal.
It defends the process, not the truth itself.
It defends the process. It just assumes that the underlying reality is stable and public, but it rarely bothers to explain why that is. It doesn't have a deep metaphysics to back it up. All it has is a procedure.
And when people lose trust in the procedure, when they start to believe the institutions running the procedure are corrupt or biased.
And the whole argument falls apart.
Exactly.
If I don't trust the medical journal, I don't care about your p-value. And then what do you have on the other side?
Continental inheritance.
Yes. The elevation of lived experience and identity-based claims to the level of absolute truth.
This is where you can't possibly understand my reality because you haven't lived it.
Exactly that. Experience becomes sovereign. It becomes the highest authority. And more than that, it becomes immune to correction or questioning.
So if I disagree with your interpretation of your lived experience, I'm not just factually wrong.
No, you're doing me harm. You are committing an act of violence. You are erasing my existence. Disagreement gets reframed as violence.
And that explains the incredible heat, the incredible temperature of our political debates.
It explains everything, because if I'm debating your data, we're having an argument. But if I'm debating your existence, your very right to define your own reality, we're having a war.
So we end up with this clash of absolutes. One side is screaming, show me the data.
And the other side is screaming, honor my experience.
And they're speaking completely different languages. That's why it feels so irreconcilable. From the analytic side, the continental side just looks irrational and hysterical.
And from the continental side, the analytic side looks cold, detached, and like it's just using data as a weapon to maintain its own power.
And because they're appealing to two totally different frameworks, one to method, the other to feeling, there's no common ground. There's no higher court of appeal.
There is no referee. Which is why politics today feels less like a debate and more like a raw power struggle. Because without a shared truth to appeal to, a power struggle is all that's left.
But, and this is where I think we need to go next, is the really interesting part. What if both sides are missing the point?
This is the pivot, okay? We've described the problem, we've traced the history, but now we need the deeper diagnosis. You're suggesting that the scalpel and the lens, for all their differences, actually share a single fatal error.
It seems like a huge claim, right? They feel like polar opposites. How could they possibly share an error?
Because they're both downstream from the real problem. They're both symptoms of a deeper mistake about what reality actually is.
Okay, let's go deep. This is section 4, the deeper diagnosis. What is this shared error?
The shared error is that both the analytic and the continental traditions treat reality as something to be managed by human cognition, rather than something to be received.
Managed versus received. Break that down for us.
Okay. The analytic mind tries to manage reality through logic and method. It operates under the assumption that if I can just categorize this perfectly, if I can just build the right logical system, if I can label every part of the atom, then I control the truth. I own it. It's an attempt to control the world through definition.
Okay, that makes sense. A kind of intellectual mastery. What about the continental mind?
The continental mind tries to manage reality through critique and narrative. It thinks, if I can just deconstruct all the hidden power dynamics, if I can tell the right story about oppression and liberation, then I control the meaning of the world.
So they're both, in their own way, trying to be in the driver's seat.
Exactly. Both traditions, in the end, place the human mind or human social structures at the very center of the universe. They assume that we are the ultimate judges of what is real.
And what's the alternative?
The alternative is the deeper philosophical tradition, the one that predates this modern split by thousands of years. The tradition that goes back through Plato and Augustine and even the early scientists. This tradition says we're missing the absolute foundation. We're arguing about the furniture in the room without acknowledging the light.
Okay, in the notes for this, you've capitalized the L in light. So we're not talking about photons here. This is a metaphysical concept.
Yes. We're talking about ontology, ontological light. In classical philosophy, and in the sources we're looking at, light is a metaphor for the very condition of reality itself. It's defined as that which makes knowing possible in the first place.
So it's not something we create.
Not at all. It is disclosed to us. It is not constructed by us.
Can you give us another way to visualize this?
Sure. Imagine you're in a pitch-black room, and it's filled with beautiful, intricate furniture. You could have the most sensitive eyes in the world. That's your lens, your lived experience. And you could have the sharpest, most precise measuring tape ever made. That's your scalpel, your data. But if there is no light in the room, both of those tools are completely useless. You can't see the furniture to appreciate it, and you can't see it to measure it.
The light is the prerequisite for everything else.
It is the prerequisite. The light represents reality as it actually is, independent of us. It precedes us. It precedes our laws, our language, our institutions, our feelings.
So on this view, truth isn't something we make up. It's something that arrives. It's revealed.
Truth is a disclosure. The definition of truth in this older tradition is simply what is. It is what it is, regardless of whether we approve of it, regardless of our political consensus, regardless of how we vote. You don't create the sun by looking at it and agreeing that it's there. The sun is what allows you to see in the first place.
This totally reframes the definition of truth. It's not what we can prove, the analytic view, and it's not what power says it is, the continental view. It's just what is given.
Correct. And this brings us to a really heavy concept from our source material. The nature of evil and falsehood. If truth is light, if it's the positive existence of reality, then what is a lie? What is falsehood?
The sources describe it with a very specific word: privation.
Privation. And this is a crucial concept, one that our modern world has almost completely forgotten. We tend to think of evil or lies as things, as active, creative forces fighting against the good.
Right, like the dark side of the force, an equal and opposite power.
But the classical view, the one grounded in this idea of light, says that's wrong. Evil is not a competing creative force. It is not a thing in and of itself. It is the absence of light. It is the hole in the shirt, not a patch made of anti-shirt material.
It's a parasite. It doesn't create anything on its own.
Exactly. It can only corrupt what already exists. A lie only makes sense and has power because the truth exists. A shadow is only possible because there is a light source and an object blocking it.
So when truth is denied, evil doesn't come in and replace it with a new truth. It just fills the void with force and manipulation.
Precisely. Darkness doesn't need to win an argument with light. It just needs the light to be turned off. When objective reality, the light is treated as optional, the only thing that rushes in to fill that vacuum is power.
This really clarifies why that facts versus experience debate is failing so spectacularly. Let's look at each side again, but through this light metaphor. Why do the secular facts of the analytic side fail without this light?
Because when your facts are severed from light, from a deeper grounding moral reality, they flatten out. They become mere techniques. They lose all their moral authority and just become tools.
Can you give us an example?
Sure, think about the eugenics movement in the early 20th century. It was very scientific, it had data, it had charts and statistics, it was very analytic, but it was completely severed from the light of intrinsic human dignity. It was severed from the deeper moral reality that a human being is not just a biological unit to be managed.
So the facts, even if they were technically accurate, became a weapon.
They became a tool of immense power and evil. And today, when someone says, just look at the statistics, people are rightly suspicious. They're asking, okay, but are you using those statistics to help me or to control me? Without a shared moral light, the scalpel always ends up looking like a weapon.
And then let's look at the other side. The problem of untethered experience. The sources say that when lived experience is not judged by an external reality, by the light, it starts to think it is the reality.
The sources were very specific and very tough on this point. There's a line that I think is hard for us to hear in 2026. They said, suffering is real, but it is not sovereign.
Whew. That is a hard sentence. Our culture is completely built on the idea that the victim is always right, that suffering confers a kind of moral sainthood.
And suffering absolutely demands our compassion and our attention. But suffering does not automatically confer infallibility. Just because I am in pain does not mean my analysis of the macroeconomic forces causing my pain is correct. Just because I feel hurt does not mean I am right about the fundamental nature of the universe.
But when we remove the light, we remove that external standard of reality, my pain becomes the only standard I have left.
And that ultimately becomes a form of tyranny. When my personal experience refuses to submit to a reality beyond itself, it says, my feeling is the ultimate law of the universe. And if you disagree with my feeling, you are not just wrong, you are my enemy.
So the ultimate consequence of losing this light, this shared submission to an external reality, is that politics becomes nothing but a pure contest of power.
It becomes a contest of competing narratives, each enforced by its own kind of power. Because if capital T truth has been dethroned, if there is no neutral referee called reality, then the only way to settle a dispute is for the stronger group to force the weaker group to shut up.
That is a bleak picture. But it certainly feels like the world we've been living in for the last decade.
It does. But this deep dive isn't just about diagnosing the doom and gloom. I think we need to clarify something really important before we start talking about a way out. This is our section 5, clarification.
Right, because it's very tempting, depending on your own personality and politics, to listen to all this and pick a team. To say, okay, I get it. The analytic guys with their science and logic were the good guys. And the Continental guys were the villains who gave us wokeness and ruined everything, or, the other way around.
And we must explicitly, strongly reject that narrative. This is not a story about good guys versus bad guys. It's a tragedy of fragmentation. Both sides were reacting to real problems and real fears.
So let's break that down. Let's talk about the failure of the supposed good guys, the analytic side.
The analytic side, the side of logic and science, always risked a profound moral blindness. By focusing only on what could be measured and verified, they often ignored or even dismissed what matters most: human dignity, justice, beauty, love, the entire qualitative experience of being alive.
Logic without humanity.
It's sterile. It's a machine. It becomes the kind of machine that can efficiently count the bodies in a mass grave, but can't understand why we should mourn them.
And what about the Continental side? What was their great risk?
Their great risk was fragmentation and nihilism. By focusing so relentlessly on context and power, they eventually sawed off the very branch they were sitting on.
How do you mean?
Well, if everything is just a power dynamic, if there is no objective truth or justice to appeal to, then on what grounds can you fight against unjust power?
You can't say this oppression is objectively wrong.
You can only say, I personally don't like this oppression and my group wants power instead. Context without constraint just dissolves into chaos, so both sides grasped a piece of the puzzle. The Analytics saw the need for rigor. The Continentals saw the reality of human suffering and history. But both failed because they refused to submit their piece of the puzzle to the whole picture.
And this leads to a really dangerous misunderstanding of what politics is even for. When we lose the light, we start expecting politics to do things it was never designed to do.
The sources make a crucial point here, and it's this. Politics is not the arena where ultimate meaning is produced.
Say that again, because that's a radical idea today.
Politics is not the factory that creates truth. The state does not create truth. The state is, or should be, answerable to truth. This is a profound reversal of how we normally think. We tend to think that we vote for our version of the truth, and then the winner gets to implement it.
Right.
But this older view says, no, reality is already there, truth is already given. Politics is just the humble, messy, practical work of trying to maintain a decent and orderly society in the light of that reality.
So the great danger is when a political order refuses to submit to that reality. It starts to think it's God.
It begins to regulate speech to match its preferred narrative. It replaces persuasion with enforcement and coercion. It confuses its own power with righteousness. If the state doesn't bow to something higher than itself, to the light, to reality, to God, it eventually concludes that it is the highest thing. And that is the very definition of tyranny.
So we've been on quite a journey here. We started in the 1950s with a faculty lounge dispute between Oxford and Paris. We watched that idea escape and evolve into a full-blown culture war in the 80s and 90s. We saw it collapse into the post-truth confusion of our own time, 2026.
And we've diagnosed the root cause as a loss of this light, a shared refusal to submit to a reality that precedes us.
So the question, really the only question that matters now, is where do we go from here? Is there a way out of the mark?
There has to be.
Let's move to our outro then. Let's
Yeah.
try to find a stabilizing note, because we promise not to just leave you, the listener, in despair. What is the path forward?
The path forward, I think, has to be about integration and realignment. And it's interesting because even within academic philosophy right now, there's an emerging movement, sometimes called naturalism, that is trying to bridge this very gap.
How is it doing that?
Well, it's essentially an attempt to use the rigorous, clear, logical tools of the analytic tradition, the Scalpel, to address the deep and messy social problems that were identified by the Continental tradition, the concerns of the lens. It's a recognition that we need both tools. We need to be both clear-eyed and compassionate.
But based on our whole discussion about light, just mashing the two traditions together isn't going to be enough, is it? You can't just tape a scalpel to a lens and call it a day.
No, absolutely not. That's the key. Integration is good, but realignment is what's required. The sources lay out a very specific hierarchy, a kind of proper ordering of our minds and our societies.
Okay, what does that realignment look like?
It involves three fundamental acts of submission. First, reason must align under truth.
Meaning what exactly?
It means that logic and reason are servants, not masters. We don't use logic just to win arguments or to defend our tribe's pre-existing conclusions. We use it as a tool to find what is actually true, even if, and this is the hardest part, especially if it proves us wrong.
Okay, that's the first one. Reason under truth. What's the second?
Power must align under judgment. The state, our political movements, our corporations, they must all recognize that they are not the source of morality. They are under judgment. They are accountable to a moral reality that they did not create and cannot change.
And the third one. This feels like it's aimed right at the lived experience crowd.
It is. Experience must align under reality. My feelings, my perceptions, my suffering, they are all incredibly important data. They tell me that something is happening to me. But my feelings are not the ultimate judge of reality. I have to take my feelings and bring them into the light and ask, is this feeling pointing to something true? Or is it a distortion?
That phrase, align under, it all comes back to submission, to humility.
It's the one ingredient that's missing from almost every part of our modern world. Humility. The analytic mind needs the humility to admit that its logical scalpel can't capture everything. That love and beauty and the sacred are real even if you can't put them in a spreadsheet.
And the continental mind.
The continental mind needs the humility to admit that truth isn't infinitely malleable just because we want it to be. that there are hard, stubborn realities, biology, physics, moral laws, that you can't just deconstruct away with clever language.
Both the logic and the context have to, in a way, kneel before reality.
That is the perfect image. We have to finally acknowledge that truth is neither trivially transparent and easy to get, that was the analytic error, nor is it hopelessly out of reach, that was the Continental error. It is there, it is given, but it requires us to get our own egos out of the way to receive it.
There's a beautiful phrase from the source material that sticks with me. Light does not coerce, it reveals.
That is the stabilizing thought I really want to leave our listeners with. We've gotten so used to truth being a weapon, something you shout at your political opponent to make them submit. But real truth, the ontological light we're talking about, it doesn't shout, it doesn't force, it just is. The sun doesn't scream at you to wake up in the morning, it just shines.
So the post-truth era isn't going to be solved by better fact-checking algorithms or AI.
And it won't be solved by crafting more compelling narratives or winning the messaging war. It will only be solved by a shared, humble, and probably painful submission to the reality that precedes us all. We need to learn how to integrate the rigor of the scalpel with the deep humanity of the lens, but ground both of them finally in the light of what is objectively given.
That feels like a powerful place to land. It sort of takes the immense pressure off of us to invent the world from scratch every morning, and instead puts the responsibility on us to simply discover it again.
Precisely. Reality doesn't need our defense. It just needs our acknowledgement.
Thank you. This has been an incredible archaeological dig. It's certainly given me a completely different frame for looking at my news feed. I don't think I'll look at a spreadsheet or a protest sign in quite the same way again.
It's been a pleasure. It is good to be out of the murk, even just for an hour.
And to you, the listener, the next time you find yourself in that epistemological murk, caught in that crossfire between a spreadsheet of cold data and a wall of angry lived experience, just take a breath. Remember the scalpel and the lens. And then ask yourself a third question. Am I trying to manage reality, or am I willing to receive it? That's it for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.